Hello everyone, meet Lucy, student in psychology, and me, her digital ID wallet issued by the government to offer a wide range of identity services. In fact, I'm a handy way of proving and protecting her identity both online and face-to-face. Let's have a closer look at what I can do. I can help governments to better communicate with citizens. Right now, I'm reminding Lucy of the appointment she needs to schedule for her mandatory vaccination.
Canada's banks are perfectly situated to help lead the creation of a federated digital ID system between government and the private sector. The World Economic Forum agrees that banks and financial institutions should lead the path forward for digital ID. Banks are highly regulated and trusted. They have advanced cybersecurity and privacy technology, and they have the infrastructure to operate provincially and nationally.
Und aus diesem Grund wird die Kommission demnächst eine sichere europäische digitale Identität vorschlagen.
With Digital ID, Australia Post offers a secure and convenient way to prove your identity. Verify your way and save time with Digital ID. Free to download from the App Store and Google Play Store.
Now, I know what you're thinking, you silly conspiracy theorist. You might be thinking, hey, take a look at these governments and corporations and financial institutions and NGOs that have presided over the self-evident debacle of the past couple of years.
Now, the ability to prove who you are with certainty and in a manner that's recognized and trusted by institutions and by governments is a fundamental prerequisite to accessing even the most basic services. If you can't prove who you are, you have limited access to healthcare, to education, to other social programs. Your ability to move across borders, to vote, to enroll in school, to access a bank account is limited or non-existent. What's more, women and children are at a greater risk of being victims of human trafficking. So whatever is your most urgent concern, refugees, economic inequality, human trafficking, financial inclusion, universal healthcare, global education, I could go on. Whatever it is, you care about identity. Indeed, the UN estimates that 10 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals cannot be met without first closing the identity gap. Even more fundamentally, identity is a human right. Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights reads, "Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law." Let me stress that. Everyone, everywhere. There is dignity, there is opportunity in being able to prove your identity.
That is Dakota Gruner, the executive director of ID 2020, presenting at the TEDx Marrakesh conference back in July of 2019. Specifically, her talk is entitled Digital Identity Weighing the Risks of Misuse and Misuse. So later on in that presentation, she raises the specter of misuse of digital ID, which is to say, once we create a digital ID panopticon system that is tracking and tracing everything that everyone does at all times, if you don't have a digital ID, then you'll really be out of luck and you won't be able to access any government services, any corporations, you won't be able to travel, you won't be able to do anything. So, in order to combat the problem of misuse, we have to make sure that no one is left behind. Where have we heard that before? And that everyone gets herded into the digital ID cattle pen. She also, to her credit, does raise the specter of misuse of digital ID systems, and does note that, oh yeah, by the way, it turns out identification schemes can be used for, say, cataloging people in order to genocide them. But, you know, anyway, we need to solve these problems before we implement the digital ID. What is ID 2020? Well, you can go to the id2020.org homepage of the ID 2020 Alliance to find out more, where if you go to their homepage, you'll see they start by telling you that we need to get digital ID right, and they will explain more about that in their talk here. So since 2016, ID 2020 has advocated for ethical, privacy-protecting approaches to digital ID. And then it goes on to give a lot of the same spiel that Gruner was just giving there. Who is this? What is this? What is this alliance? What are they talking about? So if you go to their main About page, They will say, quite simply, the ID 2020 Alliance is setting the course of digital ID. ID 2020 is coordinating funding for identity and channeling these funds towards high-impact projects, enabling diverse stakeholders, UN agencies, NGOs, governments, and enterprises to pursue a coordinated approach that creates a pathway for efficiency and responsible implementation at scale. All right. And then, okay, well, whatever, blah, 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 its principles, da-da-da-da. Oh, who comprises this alliance? Who are the alliance partners? Alliance partners include, and here is a list of, I guess, what they take to be the highlights of the ID 2020 Alliance. And some of these, I think, will be well familiar to my audience by now. Everyone knows Microsoft, and everyone in the conspiracy realist world knows about the Rockefeller Foundation and its infamous history. There are other organizations in here that you may not have heard of, but probably should. I mean, for example, how about Simprints? Every person counts. What is that? Well, if you go to simprints.com, you can find out that our biometric solution will help you tackle your greatest impact challenges. So helping the poor people of the world get scanned into their smartphones and taking the digital ID photographs and fingerprints. And, oh, it'll be so great. Tools and services for holistic support. Oh, you gotta love how they frame these types of things. So they provide mobile software, biometric ID, project configuration, project management, training materials, data analytics, and privacy and data security provided by your thumbprint or your iris scan or whatever you're looking for. What a wonderful organization. So I would put this forward as a research project for the budding young researchers in the crowd. I think every single one of these organizations and its connection to the ID 2020 Alliance and what it gets out of it and what it puts into it is probably an entire, well, podcast-worthy thing in and of itself. So if there are any researchers in the crowd who are interested, I would suggest tackling some of these bodies and groups. But one in particular that we can highlight right away that hopefully will be familiar to the Corbett Report audience is Gavi, the Bill and Melinda Gates co-founded Vaccine Alliance, which is seeking to create healthy markets for big pharma manufacturers to manufacture and distribute vaccines around the world. They connect into the digital ID agenda. In order to understand the broader population control agenda and how it ties into the Gates Foundation's plans, we have to look at a puzzling development that took place in 2017. In that year, Gavi, the Gates-founded and funded alliance that partners the Gates Foundation, the World Health Organization, and the World Bank with vaccine manufacturers to help ensure healthy markets for vaccines, took a strange pivot away from its core mission of vaccinating every child on the planet to providing every child with a digital biometric identity. The idea was first floated by Gavi CEO Seth Berkley in a Nature article that year, Immunization Needs a Technology Boost, where he states that the goal of 100% immunization will not be reached without secure digital identification systems that can store a child's medical history. He then gives a specific example. We are working with a company in India called Kushi Baby, which creates off-grid digital health records. A necklace worn by infants contains a unique identification number on a short-range communication. Community health workers can scan the chip using a mobile phone, enabling them to update a child's digital record even in remote areas with little phone coverage. This sudden interest in digital identity was no mere passing fancy for the Vaccine Alliance. Gavi doubled down by becoming a founding member of the ID 2020 Alliance, a public-private partnership dedicated to spearheading a global digital biometric identity standard. Other founding members of the alliance include Gates' first company, Microsoft, and the Rockefeller Foundation. In 2018, Gavi issued a call for innovation in digital technologies for finding, identifying, and registering the most vulnerable children. The call specifically requested technologies for capturing, storing, and enrolling the biometric details of infants on rugged biometric devices. Berkeley continued to follow up on this idea in public engagements as one of the new core missions of Gavi.
What's interesting is that people tend to think of, birth certificates as kind of a major document, but, the most common, as I mentioned before, is not a birth certificate, is not a death certificate, is not a marriage certificate. The most common connection, vital registration for the population is actually a child health card, because we reach more than 90% of children with at least one dose of vaccine as part of routine. So they're in the system. The challenge is that contact is not connected into the system. So if you could connect it, then you have the ability to give them their basic identity papers. You have ability then later on, if they want to own land or they want to have their rights, you're able to help them with that. But, we're not currently taking advantage of that. And so the children get seen, they get enrolled in the health centers, but that information is not used for anything else.
Ah, yes. Now you're starting to see how this starts to connect into the greater agenda that is being pushed right now. And that ends up with none other than Bill Gates himself telling us what a wonderful thing it is to go in and create broad national identification systems.
Every country really needs to look through these KYC, Know Your Customer rules, to make sure that customers are able to prove who they are. But, of course, in many countries, you don't have any type of ID system. And the lack of an ID system is a problem, not just for the payment system, but also for voting and health and education and taxation. And so it's a wonderful thing to go in and create a broad identification system. Again, India is a very interesting example of this, where the Aadhaar system is a 12-digit identifier that's correlated to biometric measures, is becoming pervasive throughout the country and will be the foundation for how we bring this low-cost switch to every mobile phone user in India. The same type of thing is happening now in Pakistan, and there's early beginnings of creating these ID programs in Africa as well. We expect to be able to use the ID so that when you show up for any government service, say you walk into a primary health clinic, we'll be able to take that bio-ID very quickly and bring up your electronic health record. Even if you've moved from one part of the country to the other, you will be well tracked and well served without nearly as much paperwork or waiting. And so the ID system is foundational.
Ah, yes, what could possibly go wrong with having our digital identities tied into national and, of course, eventually global digital ID grids that will then also be tied into our digital currencies and payments and proving ourselves to the banks and what have you? What could possibly go wrong? Working on this for years now, behind the scenes, and most people have no idea. Oh yeah, there's some sort of new ID that's rolling out, whatever. I'll just go and get mine and then I'll use it wherever it's asked for in whatever way. Why do we have to think about this? Well, let's take a look at the people who are spending time, money, energy, resources, talking and thinking deeply about this question of identity and why they are thinking about it. So, as with everything else in the modern world of 2022, you can probably start by at least finding some helpful spokes off of the hub of this agenda from our good friends at the World Economic Forum. And this topic gets introduced gradually and in points of where people are generally susceptible to whatever rules are being put in place this week, like in international travel, and then it starts to be rolled out for the population generally. And how is that done? Well, we can fast forward a little bit later in 2020, specifically to November of 2020, when the scamdemic was in full swing, where we saw that the World Economic Forum was informing us 1 billion people have no legal identity, but a new app plans to change that. And so the bullet point summary here, 1 billion people in the world have no legal identity. Where have you heard that before? In fact, you will hear that in every one of these presentations by every one of these globalist insiders who are connected to this agenda. Oh, won't someone think of the poor starving refugees? And the only way to do it is with digital ID. Without an ID, they can't open a bank, get a loan, or even vote. Oh no, they can't put their suggestion in the slave suggestion box. Oh no. Now a tech entrepreneur has come up with an answer. Joseph Thompson's digital app allows people to prove and protect their identity. His company, A-Tech, has also found a way to protect charity funds from corruption. So you can read, again, a summary of the problem as they see it and the solution that they're offering, including this new idea, including this infographic, which the World Economic Forum puts on all of their digital identity pages, talking about the entities, devices, and people and things that require digital identities for different parts of our increasingly digital world and experience. Perfect is a good thing, and yes, we do need this to protect our democracy. So keep this in mind. This is, of course, as something I'm sure you will have noticed by now, but the very people who most flippantly dismiss your concerns as crazy conspiracy theorizing will be the very people who will most vociferously defend those very things when they come into reality. It's a very interesting psychological phenomenon. So anyway, this is some of what the WEF has to say. There's also this, how digital identity can improve lives in a post-COVID-19 world, from January of 2021. And then I thought it was particularly interesting here, the pull quote on, as proven in Canada. So again, January 2021 context, not February or March of 2022. As proven in Canada, a digital ID ecosystem is not only a motor to connect people, governments, and the private sector in a trusted and transparent way, but it also accelerates participation in the economy, work, and mobility. As long as you're a good citizen, right? Oh, you donate to the wrong protest movement? Uh-oh, no, we're going to turn that off for you. Again, you can hardly imagine how quickly the narrative agenda is changing right now, so that I almost feel sympathy for the normies who have to do the mental gymnastics to keep up with the latest, that's a conspiracy theory. No, actually it just happened. I mean, it's a good thing. You can see them doing the bullet time matrix sort of thing to try to dodge the bullets of reason and logic. Oh no, they're going to make me actually be consistent. It would be funny, I suppose, if we weren't talking about the future of humanity, which is hanging in a balance right now. And another window into that, also from the World Economic Forum, I'll mention it for the second time in 2 weeks. You'll remember that last week on the Corbett Report podcast, we were talking about the future of censorship, and in that context, I pointed you towards the Advancing Digital Agency report from the World Economic Forum on the power of data intermediaries, talking about how in the future we're going to have data intermediaries operating on our devices. So these data intermediaries will be handling all of our information and passing it off here and there as needed as we go around through our everyday activities, which are increasingly about connections between devices, essentially. Let's get to that point, because I think that is the underlying philosophical point, which is the real basis for this, that we have to interrogate if we're going to talk about this in a more thoroughgoing manner. So let's turn to those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, which we all know about, right? I don't know what it's like in whatever neck of the woods you happen to be living in, but I can tell you in Japan, the SDGs are becoming a thing. And you see these little colorful boxes all over the place, including even on advertisements for most products and services. They'll have the little boxes in the corner to let you know which SDGs this product or service or whatever they're advertising is in support of, and whatever cockamamie excuse they have for trying to fit that in, who knows, who cares? No one, I don't think anyone really stops and considers it carefully. It's just there to constantly remind you about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we're all working towards this, guys, right? So I would imagine, probably like 99% of people, you've probably heard of the Sustainable Development Goals by now, but probably, if you're like 99% of the population, have you read them? Whatever. Details schmetails. It's just helping the earth or something. And yeah, if you go to the sdgs.un.org/goals site where they introduce the goals to, yeah, you can basically get that sort of back of the cereal box version of this. So it just says, goal number 1, no poverty. Hey, sounds good. Number 2, zero hunger. Hey, number 3, good health and well-being. That sounds great. mRNA vaccines, whatever. Quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable. I like good things too. All right, go UN. I wonder if there are any devils hiding in these details. Let's find out. So let's take a look at number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. I get that peace and justice are things that most people inherently, naturally, I mean, those are just buzzwords that are standing in for good things. Strong institutions. Let's click on to Goal 16 and find out more about this goal and what it's purporting to do. Goal 16, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. Provide access to justice for all and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. But what does that actually mean? What are the targets and indicators for this goal? So for example, target 16.1, significantly reduce all forms of violence and related death rates everywhere. All right, okay. Less death, okay. 16.2, end abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against and torture of children. Hey, I'm not in favor of torture of children either. I guess I'm on board with this agenda. 16.3, promote the rule of law at the national and international levels and ensure equal access to justice for all. Again, I understand the way Joe Normie would read that phrase, and they would generally be in support of that. I have, obviously, different ideas, I think, than a lot of people about what that means, law at the national and international levels. Hey, I've done an entire podcast on international law and what that really means. 16.4, by 2030, significantly reduce illicit financial and arms flow. Illicit financial flow. I wonder what that would look like in reality. Maybe something like what just happened in Canada, right? Illicit funds to those insurrectionist truckers, right? 16.5, substantially reduce corruption and bribery. 16, develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions. Ensure response, blah, blah, blah. Yes, feel good pap. Yay, wonderful. All right. Oh, but 16.9, let's look at this one. By 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. Again, to the average person reading this in a decontextualized way, that sounds wonderful. What does that really mean, though? How is the UN going to steward over a process that's going to make sure that everyone on Earth is provided legal identity? One of the indicators, the only indicator listed here, proportion of children under 5 years of age whose births have been registered with a civil authority by age. So as long as governments around the world are making sure that their human cattle are properly tagged and identified and issued a barcode at birth, then hey, good. We can reach this wonderful goal. Anyway, I think by this point, only the asleepest of the asleep, the sleepiest of the sleepiest, could possibly not understand the incredible danger of stepping into this digital ID reality. So I guess at the basic, absolute, fundamental level of this, the philosophical level, which is what the solution side of things always comes back down to, again, any institution, governmental framework, whatever, that requires us as natural, free human beings born as sovereign individuals into this world, that the idea that we now have to access and register and have our entire lives put on some sort of ledger or something in order to then just to live our lives, just to be human beings in the world, that doesn't speak to a problem with the identification system that we have now, and it's not good enough and we need to create a new. No, that speaks to a problem with the very concept of the institutions and the institutional framework that we are being born into. You are not born a free human being in this world anymore. You cannot simply be a human being. You now have to register and be barcoded and scanned and put into a document, and here, this is me. And now you are being, in a key sense, reduced down to a number, and that number will then be encoded into your chip, inserted into your body, and eventually you will be the number, not the human being. And that is the fundamental problem going on here, so I think we need to address it at that level. But more practically, we are born in this system. It is here. It is not going to disappear overnight. So our role in this is to, in every way, shape, and form we can, at every point, to, as I think Ernest Hancock has put it before on Declare Your Independence, to be a butthead, and to say no, and to not provide the ID that is required of us for this or that. And the more that people actively resist and do not comply, the more we can, at the very least, put the sticks in the wheels of this bicycle as it goes along to hopefully stop the bike from going. It is important to put these issues on the table because, unfortunately, as I say, most of the people around you will never have heard of an ID 2020 or know about the World Economic Forum's forays into digital identification or into the UN and how it's trying to put this forward as some sort of human right, or how this is all going to be used to tie everything together into a digital ID which will be you. And that digital ID will be regulated, it'll be tracked, it'll be controlled. It will tell you where and when you can go, for how long you can go, what you can purchase when you're there, who you can and cannot interact with. And it will be regulated at the digital ID level. If they can get you and who you are as a human being into an ID, that ID can be tracked, controlled, and regulated in any way they want. Understand how fundamental this is to the coming system of control, and we have to not comply. Do not start putting your entire identity into the digital space, because it will not lead in the direction of human freedom. And as even the World Economic Forum says in their own document on data intermediaries, it does start to raise the question of, can we retain our humanity? What does human agency mean when we are more and more digital beings?